Okay. Has it started live streaming?
Okay, I think we are live now.
Okay. Awesome. Let me double check on. Yes. Perfect. Awesome.
All right, and I think at some point I'll ask for the right to share the screen.
Oh yes, I think so. I think you should be able to share the screen now.
Okay, I have the ability, and I'll let you know when you're. Wait, no, I'll do it when I'm at the point.
Pariya, you can get started, okay, whenever you're ready. Because this is live streaming on YouTube and LinkedIn. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Weekly Web today. Before we start, I want to preface this by saying that we are streaming this session on YouTube and LinkedIn at Business School of AI. By joining the Zoom, you give permission to be included in the recording, which we'll post anywhere or store or use. And if you don't want to be included, you can be off camera and type your questions, and I'll do it to our speaker. And those of you on LinkedIn can also post a question in the comments. Okay, so I'm your host today. My name is Pariya Sarin, and I'm an incoming college student studying information technology and a part of the Weekly Web team. And today I'm joined by our guest speaker, Pamela Gupta. And I'll give a short introduction on Pamela Gupta. So Pamela Gupta is the CEO of Trusted AI, an advisory consulting company with a focus on how trustworthy AI can be instrumental in helping organizations gain a competitive edge and promote better business outcomes, including accelerated innovation. Pamela is helping businesses from potential risks down the road, particularly related to areas such as intellectual property, compromise, biased data, cybersecurity, and privacy. Now, before we give an introduction on what we are going to be going over today, Sudha would like to say a little bit about the exciting new generative AI that we're testing out today and implementing today at Nuclear.
Thank you, Pariya. I appreciate that. So, hello, everybody. It's a treat for me to be at Weekly Wed, and I'm very impressed with Pariya hosting this. And Pamela, I'm a big fan, so I'm so excited for today's session on cybersecurity and in the world of generative AI. One of the things I like to do as a technology futurist is go hands-on and try things and new technologies and what is happening out there instead of just, talking about it. And so we got an opportunity because Zoom has introduced something called AI Assistant. I have no affiliation to any brand, including Zoom. I have to say this about every company because I get very excited about some technologies. So what it is a different discussion. I had covered that a little bit in Sudha Live. But as an application for users, what it means is we are here on Weekly Wed. Some of you are here on the Zoom with us, so you have the ability to chat on the Zoom or speak up when Pariya allows us, right? And then we go away, and then we come back next week. So, and this Weekly Wed global series happens every week, and then we come back next week, and then we chat again, and that goes away. So, what Zoom has done is Zoom said, "Hey, what is the data here? The meeting transcript and the chat discussion is content." And so what they've done is they've built a generative AI model and built it out or deployed it as a chatbot called AI Assistant. And if you think about what the AI chatbot is going to do, it is not, this is the disclaimer they've given. And for every one of you who joined the Zoom, you must have seen the disclaimer and said, yes, I accept it or I leave the meeting, right? That they are saying that they are not building this chatbot and training it using our data. So whatever we chat here and our discussion, our faces is not being used by Zoom. That's their claim, right? But whatever we put in the chat here, the generative AI is going to go and do a fine tuning on this and go do a summarization. So generative AI compared to other AI has specific capabilities. One of them is text summarization and another is Q&A. So they've taken those two features. So if you participate in the chat today, if you're here and I'm going to turn on the transcript, I believe the transcript is included in this, then at the end of this, I've set it up. It's not just to the admin, but all of you who are here in the Zoom, because we have the email when you're signed up for the Zoom. It will send out a summary of today's session. And then you have the ability to do a Q&A, chat with the chatbot. I've not figured that part out. So today we are just going to do text summarization will come out at the end of today's session. So ask your questions on the chat, add resources and comments, because we want the chat to be rich so that the AI has something to summarize for us. So that's my ask. And for those of you on LinkedIn and YouTube, we will take questions on LinkedIn. You will miss out on this AI chatbot, generative AI experience, but I'll come and tell you more. Okay, back to you, Pariya. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha. That it sounds great that we have a new tool for our attendees. And so now I'm going to give an introduction on what Pamela will be talking about today before we hand it over to her. So today we're going to go over the best cybersecurity practices for protecting highly impacted systems. These are attacks that can be set up against large language models and some that can be waged by large language models. So now I'm going to hand it over to Pamela to introduce herself a bit further. And for those live, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. And there's going to also be a Q&A session after Pamela's presentation. So please also keep some questions for that. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Pamela.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I do have a cold, so may not sound my usual self, but I assure you it is me. One quick question, can you see my screen? Because I'm sharing.
I'm just seeing a black screen. It's not showing anything else.
Okay, so let's see why that would be. Stop share, and I'm going to share again. Okay. The other thing is, I mean, I do have thoughts on the whole generative AI component of Zoom. Let me check first. Can you see my screen now?
It is still showing it. It is still
I can see it. I can see
okay.
it. Generative AI and cybersecurity, right?
Right. That's the title slide.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm just in the black screen, but it's okay. If everybody else is saying, I'm fine with it.
Okay, Pariya, you can see it too?
Yeah, I can see it as well.
Okay, now if I slide, go to the next one, let me make sure you can see the next screen. Should say harness.
Yeah, it shows this.
Okay. All right, so very, excited to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's cybersecurity as it relates to de-risking adoption of AI. How do we harness the power of AI in essence and identify what we want to get at the end of the, as an outcome, but what are the risks along the way? And I have a couple of slides on that, so I'm not going to, launch into that as of this moment. But the cybersecurity by itself is not enough when it comes to protecting these systems and making sure they have integrity. So that being said, let's take a look at what are the other elements and what are the things to be very cognizant of. So let's start off with what is the harness? How do you harness the power of AI? By using a responsible approach and ethical and trust. How do they all come together? So when I'm talking about high impact systems, in this case, I am talking about generative AI systems because they hold a lot of power. So very quickly, as Pariya and Sudha mentioned, I lead a company. It's called Trusted AI. It's an OutSecure company, which was a cybersecurity strategy creation company. And I've been a crusader, I would say, for creating and defining trustworthy AI. What is it? How are we going to achieve it? From a practical and a governance point of view. for a long time before it became a buzzword or a hype, which by the way I have nothing against, because we need all the attention that we can drive towards it. It is extremely important that we do these have these right considerations, roadmaps, north stars as we are either designing or deploying or adopting AI. I do host an interview, a podcast, and a video cast on the subject with industry leaders, providing guidance on how trustworthy AI can be used in helping companies gain a competitive edge, as well as promote better business outcomes by identifying risk. And again, how does risk management relate to trustworthy AI? So I'm taking this from McKinsey I'm launching right now into what is Gen AI and what is the topic that we are here to discuss, which is what is the power of these systems, of generative AI systems, and how do we protect them? Also, how does it relate to a broader risk management framework? This is an excellent slide from McKinsey, so I'm very happy to share it. Gives a kind of the evolution of how we are where we are today, and also lays out a difference between what has been predictive AI and generative AI. There's a huge difference, a big difference, and what the progression shows is it started out as being a broad field. AI started out as being a broad field of developing machines that can replicate human behavior, okay, which led on to one of the areas of AI being machine learning. And it is a major approach to achieve AI by teaching machines, as you can see on the slide, to learn relationships hidden in data. A lot of data points that we as humans are not able to create a correlation from or create a map of that can be leveraged. Machine learning can be leveraged for doing that. Okay. Deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning and is a branch, as they call out here, is using neural networks that kind of mimics the human brain because there is more than one layer. And therefore, you're seeing how things are going from correlations and analysis to really thinking about what the data is and how, how the human brain processes data. One thing to note is that, one of the points, and I'm sorry, I have to take off my glasses. I can't read without. This is because of the light. How we're talking about millions of neurons that are involved in making a kind of mimicking how the brain works. By now, we have far exceeded the number of neurons that exist in these systems as compared to the human brain. But just something to know, it's not a one-to-one correspondence. So the number of neurons we have is not going to produce the same kind of results. You'll need maybe 100 or 1,000 neurons in a computational setting, in a artificial intelligence setting to a human brain. So that's one thing to note. And now where we are in generative AI, we're talking about a branch of deep learning, which is very different in terms of the fact that it can actually generate output. Okay, so any questions on that? We can pause for a second, otherwise I'll continue. So,
Sorry.
yes.
So you're talking about this, how we just have reached this generative AI stage. What do you think of beyond this stage and the future of generative AI and AI, especially as it pertains to cybersecurity?
Yes, so it's really important to see how these systems are built what are the different components when it comes to generative AI, since we are focused only on Gen AI today and large language models. So that's the, let me just skip to the next slide then, okay? We are all familiar with what are the common manifestations and large language models that exist today, which is a form of Gen AI, okay? Speaking of cybersecurity, and remember I led out with the fact that we are not going to be able to just look at things in silos, right? We do want to take a look at what is the risk and what are the other components that are very much going to play a role in securing these systems, okay? So let me just briefly talk about the AI RMF and how NIST has produced a risk management framework, which is really taking a look at a whole life cycle approach and making these systems trustworthy, okay? Recognizes the importance of context, and therefore there is no one size fits all, a risk-based approach, and also acknowledges the importance of impact assessments to identify where the systems are going to be deployed and how are they going to be used. And after that, there is really, when it comes to generative AI, a risk management framework such as NIST does not really align completely, just because these systems are slightly different when it comes to the way they learn and the way they are assimilating data. But it's good to have that as a background. Okay, so I'm going to skip this as well, but let's try to, let's focus in on large language models and the threat surface. Okay, there are two ways of looking at the threat surface when it comes to securing and the cybersecurity of AI, generative AI, and large language models. One is, what are the threats from using large language models? What can go wrong with the way they are constructed, with the way they are learning, right? Because there are multiple manifestations of not just having a large language model. For example, take any large language model today, such as ChatGPT, for example, okay? We take a ChatGPT large language model, it's not just what is within ChatGPT, but it's also how is it going beyond and interacting with the rest of the ecosystem, or where it can either get data from or it can provide output to. So what are the interfaces that exist between the large language model? Now, just we have to remember, we are talking about how to, and I'll go more into that. But right now, so the two categories I want to call out are threats using large language models. Where can we go? What can we do within the large language model itself that can be problematic, that can be a high surface of a threat vector for cybersecurity? Okay. So let's just take a quick look down. What can be the threat using and what can be the threats against large language models? Now, there are some factors that come into play from the conventional cybersecurity realm, such as, well, we have seen prompt injection. Okay. There is insecure output handling. There can be API abuse, sensitive data leaks, right? Insecure plugins. These are all things we have seen in the conventional systems within, the cybersecurity threat landscape. But when it comes to large language models, it's not comparing apples to apples. Okay, there is a very large difference when it comes to prompt injection. For example, I'll just take one as an example. One of the areas that we see is a very common threat vector that is known in the cybersecurity API and application security world, such as through organizations such as OWASP, which publish the OWASP Top 10 is a gold standard for anyone who is building for applications that are internet facing, for example. Okay, Now, they have also done a treatise or a examination of large language models. And on the top, in the top 10 is prompt injection. In the conventional security world, we saw SQL injection, which is crafting queries. So where you can trick the backend system to actually reveal data that is either proprietary, or it can be sensitive, or it can be just really a back-end abuse where you can go into releasing data that you should not have access to through a well-crafted attack. In the LLM world, we're talking about prompt injections, but here's where I was talking about that it's not comparing the same thing, okay? Prompt injections can be attacks that you can craft using ordinary natural language. So English, for example, is a natural language. We are conversing and we are exchanging with large language models using English. To take a broad spectrum of language as opposed to a programming language that you could use to craft a SQL injection attack, right? Which is very narrow in its scope. Now you have the entire English language to take that and be able to identify what could be the attack, how could there be a malformed query. That becomes a huge problem. One of the things you may have seen is in the recent DEF CON at Black Hat, the US government and other entities had arranged for a red teaming efforts against LLMs. That to me is a good step in trying to see what can go, how you can attack these large language models, and how are what are some of the ways you can go about conducting an attack or compromising them, these systems. But really, by itself, the red teaming efforts are not enough on their own. And I feel I'm not going to go into that right now, but so that is an example of where we're seeing threats using LLMs. But so you can use a large language model. In other words, you can craft an attack and you can get a response and really get access to information that you should not have access to, such as proprietary information, such as sensitive information. So if you go down this list of insecure output handling, training, data poisoning, it quickly becomes very obvious that even though these are some of them are the same terms you see in conventional application security, it's a very different world when it comes to large language models, and the impacts are extremely of a higher order of magnitude. I'm going to give you an example in the next slide of threats using LLMs and threats to LLMs, and how can we compromise or bring these systems down or degrade the performance of these systems is also something that OWASP has identified, and which I like to point out here. Denial of service. If how that the shape and the form that attack would take would be different, but it would still be a denial of service, which is uploading or sending a task to a large language model that can take up all the tie up the resources where it's kind of maybe you put it into a loop, for example, where you're not going to be able to discern between what is the valid output it should be giving as opposed to going into searching for the right output, for example. Now, there are ways, of course, of throttling, and there are means one can put in, place for all of these attacks, but it's going to require, because of the very, very fluid and the dynamic nature of how these systems are created and how they're learning and how they're behaving, to the extent that we don't have a good place of your hand or a finger on this is the state today and this is what will work, our posture for risk remediation and identification has to be really agile, as I point out in the next slide. And before I go off the slide, I just want to talk about there is a large amount of complexity when it comes to enterprise adoption of large language models that we have to identify upfront, which is access to backend systems. Which systems do these LLMs get access to? How do you devise that interface? API abuse, plugin abuse, how the plugins can be exploited. There is an excellent article on Archive that talks about poisoning the data that is feeding the LLMs. Okay, now that is a combination, as you can see, that goes between threats using LLMs to threat to an LLM, right? And it is going, it is, so it, just suffice to say, we cannot take a static approach. There is no static source code analysis example, or just saying, well, we won't give access for LLMs to backend systems, or we'll only throttle it, and then therefore we can contain the risk. It'll have to be something that we have to be extremely cognizant of, especially in cases where depending on the use case, of course, but depending on the business case. Okay, but for enterprise adoption, for a high risk and impact area adoption, the way we approach risk to threats to LLMs and from LLMs has to be very contextual and extremely dynamic, and that's why I started out with that. The NIST RMF as a background, because you do need something to have as a point of reference. Okay. So let's take a look at some threats using LLM, some things that have happened. For example, one of the threats is that the LLMs can come up with context or responses, and people and organizations may be starting to think, hey, you know what? Large language models can produce code, so I can use that and eliminate programmers, because I can just use 2 programmers and I can create, as opposed to 4, and have large language models produce code. So this one example I wanted to mention, and this is early on when ChatGPT was creating, you could put in a prompt and it would give you code. There is a service called Stack Overflow, and it is a Q&A website for programmers. Coders have started asking a lot of questions about improper or code, the responses they got back from ChatGPT, and was not code that was working. So what Stack Overflow had to do, in essence, was to just forbid anyone from using, asking a question about code that had been generated using ChatGPT, for example. I'm not saying this is going to be the state forever, but there is it really depends on your use case, where you're going to depend on the output coming back from LLMs. And it's not just ChatGPT, it's other large language models as well. So what does that mean? We've seen script kiddies in the yesteryears in the cybersecurity world. So is this a form of a modern script kiddie, right? Where anybody can write code, but without having the right framework and the guidance, you may not get the results, or you may get actually negative results. Another, of course, big risk is, because these are multimodal, we are talking about, and there's extremely high stakes when it comes to geopolitics and elections, etc. We're looking at the ability to create extremely convincing campaigns that may not be fact-based and may be very propaganda-based, right? In terms of, this is the result we want. So I don't know if you have use tools, but you should really be taking a look at, and I'm happy to talk about, at the end, if we have time, or send a link for some of the generative AI tools out there, which are getting better and better, and I've used them, and they are extremely compelling to use, for business purpose. So it's very becoming, the sophistication is increasing rapidly and at a rate that we cannot even perceive. So it can be used for good or bad. Now we saw an example of what can go, threats against. Now let's take an example for threats coming from. One example here is from CSO magazine, which is based on, it talks about creating malware, mutating malware, and that's something really important for me I want to spend a little bit of time on. So it's okay to say that, yes, LLMs can produce malware, right? And it can be better, and you have to know what you're doing, but you can get it to create malware. But the issue here is that the way the protection we have against malware, against zero-day attacks, even, for example, is the ability for endpoint detection tools to have seen attacks in the wild. That's how they know that there is an attack happening, and there is a virus, there is malware out there which has X, Y, and Z behavior. Now, if you are using, in this case, the malware that was created as a proof of concept, was using an API called to ChatGPT. So every time it got a result, the result was slightly different. Now that is a pretty much a nightmare that is not going to get detected, in other words, by a endpoint detection tool. Okay, so not only can you create, a sophisticated form of malware, but the tools themselves for detecting them, if they are not able to, and by their very nature, most of these EDR tools are using known attacks or even something that they're seeing out in the wild, then chances of that getting detected is going to be very low, and that's a big problem that we need to think about. Pariya, any questions? I'd like to pause for a minute.
Yeah, one question that I have with regard to tools and strategies is, are there any new or emerging tools that can assist organizations in identifying and also responding to the latest LLM cybersecurity threats effectively?
So the tools, I would say, that are there are quickly also ramping up, right? There isn't anything out there that is going to be a silver bullet, right? For Gen AI or for AI, in other words. These are complex systems. So I think the biggest tool one has right now as a company or as an organization is to first educate your personnel, and not just the ones who are perhaps even evaluating AI, but across the board on what is involved in automation and automated decision making and AI. How does it impact your company? And then what are some of the tools that you as a business or unit, for example, in an organization, can be using that is an AI tool, whether it's a generative AI tool or whether it is a predictive tool or AI tool. What are the tools? What can go wrong to really bring that risk cognizance at a human level, right? That's one thing. And the other is really going to come down to process, right? What is let's say you are a company and you are, for example, what we saw with Samsung, right? The engineer for one of the semiconductor teams had taken code from a meeting and some meeting notes, put it into ChatGPT to see how it could be optimized. And what the system came back with is less newsworthy, but the fact that they had put in their intellectual property data into ChatGPT, that became public knowledge, and it became almost a data breach, in the conventional sense, if you want to call it that, because now it's highly sensitive data, which takes millions of dollars to produce, and now it can be found on a public platform. Okay. So the biggest tool I would like to come back to, what are the tools that you can use for generative AI? It's going to start with education. You need to know what is the outcome, what is the risk tolerance. Are you using it for a application or a business scenario where it can be customer facing, for example? Then you have to not only bring in the tools, but you have to have a steering committee that takes a look for it could be a steering committee, or it can be a group of, the same group that is taking a look and making sure that the responses are acceptable for sharing with outside entities, outside the company, to make sure that you are getting the right responses, right? Now, that's one thing. Now, as far as the tools, it depends on how you are adopting these large language models, right? Are you using public large language models, or are you creating your, fine tuning and using your own data, right? And the third is just creating your own large language models. So the tools and best practices that one would adopt would vary by those three scenarios as well. There are some tools, but I don't want to be endorsing tools as such right now, because they're still forming. I'm not comfortable in putting my weight behind, a couple of them that, for generative AI. But in terms of tools such as making sure that you're building according to, the guidelines that you are looking to develop for. And, is there model drift, for example? Are your tools performing are models performing? Yes, there are some tools, but that's more in terms of conventional, or if there is something called conventional, but your mainstream AI, not Gen AI. Okay. How are we doing for time, Pariya?
Sorry?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, well, we can continue on 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, I think I have a couple of more slides, and then we can definitely pause for Q&A. So, like I said, you really do want to have a established way of getting the message to not only users in the organization, but also the tool adopters. Before you bring in a tool, you have to have the cognizance of what is the power, and where do we want to go. Now, one thing I talked about in the beginning is dynamic agility, right? That's not a term that exists, but I think that is really apropos to, it is something that we need to be prepared for, because we really cannot take the old conventional way of creating even a policy and taking months, So I was in conversation with a company that wants to bring it in. It's a drug discovery company, pharmaceutical, and they're looking to use generative AI. And one of the things it mentioned was it's been almost 4 months since they started crafting a acceptable use policy. We do need a little bit more agility when it comes to creating those guardrails within a company, right? As policymakers, as governance individuals, as business leaders within an organization, um, we do have to move fast, because this is not something that you can use, old frameworks where it took forever to create a policy, you create an acceptable use policy. I'm not saying that you go out and just craft one haphazardly, but it does need agility at the very core of an organization, is what I like to point out. So again, this is more of a talking slide, so I'm not, it's not a presentation slide, but the points I want to make here is the awareness and the guardrails are going to be extremely important to have now, not tomorrow. It is not enough to say that we are going to prohibit use of generative AI, because you may do it within certain contexts, but when people leave that context, for instance, not in the corporate network, for example, then you could still have that leakage of proprietary data, or queries because people want to make their life easier, and they are putting in, they could be using these tools or systems for making getting better results or getting better efficiencies, for example. So the time is really now and yesterday. Not you really need agility. I cannot stress that enough. Just because we are seeing or have seen how quickly the technology is progressing, and there's no stopping that. Okay. So what are the array of risks for business? Right? Is it going to be? It is important to balance the risk and reward for innovation. And if you don't innovate, you don't use tools your competitor does, you're going to weigh that in, right? So that's is it important for your company to gain a competitive edge and gaining trust in your business, right? And how to gain trust in your business is what I started out with, which is having that risk management framework, that we know these are the risks, these are the processes, these are the tools, these are the, large language model is what I'm calling a tool here. For example, we have adopted it, but these are the risks we have taken into account. If it is something related to customer interface, for example, it goes through these lines of vetting or review. And again, it has to be fast, though. I mean, it cannot be a very laborious and a bureaucratic process, but there has to be a process that employees can go to and say, yes, these are the terms for usage. These are the terms for getting fired, maybe, right? These are not acceptable. This is acceptable. I know when ChatGPT came out, was released to Amazon, I think, who found their proprietary code on some of their on the system, and the big companies or small companies are facing the same kind of a platitude of risk and uncertainty. That was some time ago, right? Well, some time being relative, it was not that long ago. But the problem is there wasn't a acceptable use policy in the company, and therefore there was no guardrails, right? And we can't rely on just responsible AI or the legal frameworks. Yes, those are very, very, very important. But as a business, you have the guardrails. It's your responsibility to provide those guardrails within your context, because no amount of regulation is going to know the risk that you face as a business. Okay, so I'm going to conclude on this. Let me see. Yeah. The enterprise generative AI is very much focused on responsible use and making it trustworthy, and it goes with hand in hand in who is using it, what are the guardrails that you create for your employees, and how much are they aware, because they may not be aware of some of the implications of putting in proprietary information into a model, for example, or even not, it may not be even proprietary, but it could be high impact that you're putting in a query which can solve a problem or seems to solve a problem, but actually will make you if it's customer facing, for example, may lose credibility with a customer because it's the wrong answer, for example, right? So I see Sudha has joined the session, is turned the video on. I know you've been there, but Sudha, any questions? I'm going to stop here.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt your flow. This is amazing stuff. So I was pinging Pariya to say, is this a good time? I have some question. You were actually saying in the beginning, one of the things. So the way I understand it, in the building of the model itself, there could be cyber security risks, and there could be prompt engineering that somebody could maliciously done prompt hacking in some form and can get that out, right?
Right.
The other thing is enterprise using. That is where I am hearing from people every day saying there's excitement for generative AI, and they want to know how to use that for their enterprise. There are all these applications at 1,000-foot level, and I'm actually getting ready to do a workshop on with certain companies in Brazil, in Barcelona and Venice, about how to take their existing data and build out the generative AI products. So one thing you said stuck with me is you said don't don't give data that you don't want to put in the model. Protect your data, because the one thing that enterprise worries about, cares about, is their data, and there are various different silos and different groups they're protecting the data. So can you talk to that protecting data aspect? And then the second part is educating people is again like a nice to have. Is there a practical org that is being created for cybersecurity, or guidance on doing this right for building enterprise level generative AI for the companies? Or is there like a risk framework? Are there groups evolving? Who is actually owning this? It's one, because I saw a lot of frameworks for ethical AI, responsible AI, made by almost every possible company, but there was no enforcement and nobody built it. Nobody cared about it. Even if they cared, they did not know that it existed. After some time it faded away. So how, one question is, how do you protect the data? Certain data should not get in. And what is the risk framework or the org structure of how this is being there's a compliance created for that?
Yes, I think so. Let me just start with the first question, which is how do you protect your data, right?
Sorry, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see you, because I just see two
Oh,
lines on
all right.
enterprise AI. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, so the first thing is how do you protect your data, right? That is the biggest question when it comes to, well, let's step back. There are multiple ways of using LLMs, right? There is the model where you use the public model, right? That's where you really have to be very careful about what data you put in. Even for ChatGPT usage, right, which is everything is going into their model. There are multiple ways of invoking ChatGPT, right? One, it can be through a prompt, right, which is the most common. You go to ChatGPT, you put in your data, and it's whatever you put in. If you look at the privacy policy, it's going all being fed into the model. Now, there is a way of using an API-based approach to ChatGPT, right? And I'm just focusing on one because it's hard to talk about all, But so the other one is, through API. And if you go through API, you have the option of telling, indicating that you're not giving consent for your data to be used by ChatGPT for further training model. Okay. So in that scenario, if you put in intellectual property or competitive data or sensitive data, which is belongs to the organization, then you're still relying on their ability to follow through and enforce that. Yes, they will not use that data, right? But so you can take that maybe at your own risk. That
Yeah, I think GPT-4 onwards, they've actually said that, it is in the context of this session. You can put the data, but then
yeah,
we will not store that data anywhere else. So it is there in the session and might go into backup somewhere, but they are officially not storing that data from each sessions to go train their model. That's what GPT-4 has said, and we'll have to believe
right,
OpenAI for that. Yeah.
right. So that is what they're saying, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt, right? Because these systems they do need data. Without data, they cannot grow and learn or get better. So one thing OpenAI has done is now close the model, right? So earlier it was open source. You could see, the model itself, and now you cannot. So I don't. I would just take that with some skepticism that you don't know what's happening at the end, at the end of the day, right? If you so the what are the other options? In other words, then if you are, let's say, you're highly paranoid, your data is extremely sensitive, and you don't want to put it into that cloud, right? Into the LLM cloud, because that is how they are. So look, we have to differentiate. This is not just hosting your data in a cloud scenario, right? Because when you host data in a cloud, they have no interest in, they're not going to be growing based on your data, right? Let's say you're hosting your servers and your data in cloud. So this is slightly different. You're taking, that's why I'm skeptical that a system that's working on data, that's learning and growing by accumulating and eating your data, and you're not going to be using it. How much is going to be used? Are there any caveats? Is there a fine print? That's one thing. The other thing is, if you are, let's say, you are at the level that you don't want to trust them with your data at all, you build your own LLM, right? You use your, there are tools out there that are offering, for example, putting your own data into a private instance where it's not shared. So that would be the way to really, depending again on the use case, but that would be the way to really make sure that you have the highest level of protection for your that data. In terms of, so the one thing that I will tell you is, I have seen a tool where, and I'm working with them actually, because I think it's a very powerful tool for for tokenizing PII and on the fly in real time. Okay. And then if your use case is where only certain business leaders or users need to see that detokenized data, even when it goes into a LLM, that they are able to recover it. That's the way to really approach it. Okay. But a lot of these are really being kind of coming out on the fly. So either you have to make a choice, right? I also work with a company which has a privacy company, and they just use obfuscate or mask everything. So even the data scientists cannot see the data, right? But they can still process the models can still process the data, but the data scientists cannot see it. There are always trade-offs, right? When you use such data for training purposes, there can be trade-offs where your level of accuracy may go down, right? So again, depending on who you are, what you want to do with it, and how critical it is that, is it accuracy? Is that critical? Or is it confidentiality? Is that critical? Those are the things that I was alluding to when I was saying that the businesses, when you're creating that guardrails for your company, that's what you got to take a look at.
See, companies already have this pre-AI, pre-generative AI world, right? So I used to head mobile analytics at eBay, and we had different tiers of access to customer data. And there are groups like my analytics group, on an average, did not even get access to PII. right? So we could understand customer behavior and what they were doing, all with a certain tiered level of data, and still produce value for the company. And so this exists in the data warehouses in large enterprise. So now when you say, but this is a new kind of risk, now that LLM is going to take that, and then they could hallucinate based on that, and it doesn't have transparency on that, and somebody else is going to gobble that inside a platform, and we don't have transparency on that. Is there a bridge that's happening? I'm trying to think from a very practical perspective. When you talk to enterprise teams who are innovators and excited about this, I don't want to tell them, okay, this is all amazing, but don't use it. Or it is beyond them to go create this other tiered access, masking PII that might not be within their job scope. So is there like a org evolving? Is there like trust frameworks that's out there? Do you produce something? I know you work with companies. I didn't want to market yourself. You wanted to educate us, so I appreciate that. But can you tell us what would somebody on the enterprise side, with sitting with data and excitement for LLMs and generative AI, but with caution not to compromise their enterprise cybersecurity or data, what are their options?
So yes, thank you. So that is exactly what I would do. We would take a look at what is the company doing, what are they looking to, what is the value that they want to get from it, and not just now, what anticipate what can be the value going forward, right? Because you don't want to limit them to, that's the whole promise of generative AI and AI, is what you can, the hidden value that you can get from data points that you were not even putting into your KPIs, right?
Yeah.
Your key performance indicators for a business were around, let's say, customer satisfaction. But here now you can see data that is leading you to form different KPIs as to not just did a satisfied customer go buy other products, but it's also the customer was looking into other, they had a concern about this or really like something else. How can we use that for personalizing, right? The value that we are going to get from the system is in that higher the sensitivity of that data, higher the personalization, and higher the value. So how do we make this achievable? So that is exactly what we do, right? How do you create that trust framework for a company? And what are the guardrails that you do need, for example? If it is HR data, right, for example, and you're putting in, a high, let's say it's an organization and you have maybe two business units that are really marketing and HR, right, let's say, okay, that really will gain the most from being able to query, what's in that system, for example. Um, the fact that, access control is extremely important, right? Who has access to what data? But would you be able to control that if everything is in one big system at the end of the day, right? So how do you control what is acceptable use now and acceptable, and if it's, is kosher output, if it's the right output, and who has access to it, all that just comes together then in that case, right? So that acceptable use policy, for example, is taking a look now at what is proprietary data, what should not leave the environment. It's okay now. Maybe you broaden that what you were talking about, that certain people are not even given access to the system. Maybe you broaden that cordon, right? However, what you do, you place stricter controls within that group that is given access to that data. But by no means should it be given, should everybody be given access to sensitive data, large language models. So it can be very context based, but in order to, so just to summarize, it will be context based. It will be that you want to get more data and more data points out of your data. And in order to do that, it will be highly context based. In other words, who gets access to it, when, who can do what with it is also can be extremely controlled. Okay. So whether it's security or whether it's, so let's take a use case, for example, in this case, we have HR data, right? You are now being asked by certain regulations, such as the NYC audit law, that if you are using that data to make a decision, right, you have to be able to display and show that you use automated system, why you chose one candidate or another. So you see now you can definitely use generative AI for this, right? You can have all the candidates there, all the information is there. So it'll cut down the efficiency, or the time to produce even what is being used, being asked for output, whether it's explainability or transparency in the system can be cut down. But the more things you put in place proactively, such as what are the security guardians we need, what are the what is the rightful usage, and so it's a combination of policy, it's a combination of technology, but it is very much a combination of the risk of that business, right? So it comes into at the end of the day, what is the rightful usage and how are you going to determine the impact of any system that you do? And that's what we start with, right? Take a look at what is the algorithmic impact assessment? Are there ethical issues? Can there be, what are the things that can come and what needs to happen? Is it you sanitize your data? Do you only use data that you know? For example, feeding the systems, you have an ability to monitor the models so that make sure that they are not producing, there's no model drift, there is no producing hallucinated data or data that can be, so just in this case, what I've talked about is having that vetting the data, owning your data, having that transparency into the data and into that entire life cycle of what's feeding into your model. But now in the model itself, you have a guardrail of who has access to what data, but with that higher latitude. So yes, HR also has access to it. You can get data that you may not even have thought existed from another business case, right? Business use. You'll have to combine them at some point. But what I'm saying is, it's a combination of tools, process, and people, right? Educate the people very, very emphatically, right? Know what are the risks they are taking and what is the value they can get. That should be everyone, because everybody should be thinking. If you look at companies who are really at the leading edge of using AI and progressing, these are companies that have adopted AI into automation and automated decision making and automated, looking at it at each business level as to my business can get this value from here. And that's where it starts. So impact assessment, all data may not be a problem. So, that all that will be, taking structured steps along the whole way in that life cycle. Data, choosing your data, what the model should be doing, what is it doing, and having that governance baked in, right, from the beginning.
Sounds good. Looks like it's still early stages and companies are figuring out because they're not readily available public tools. And there aren't orgs who are just focusing on this risk, creating the risk framework, right?
So the risk frameworks that exist are, and regulations that are coming out, right? I feel they are very piecemeal, right? They'll focus on whether the data is there, kosher, right? It's vetted, it's clean data. Or they're looking at ethical biases that can be introduced by the model itself, or algorithmic bias can be induced. But when it comes to generative AI, all of that conversation doesn't hold, right? So if you look at EU AI Act, for example, you're taking a look at piecemeal. Where is the confidentiality coming in? What are the different? And I'll send you one case study that we have done on the application of EU AI Act for a generative AI use case. Okay, but there is really, it's very much based on who's using the data and what is the type of data and what kind of LLM you want to use. Is it a public one? Is it a private one? Or is it one that you have um, control over how you're using it through? One thing you have to know, for example, you're talking about asking about cybersecurity risk. When a LLM goes out using plugins and is using data that can be available out on the internet that you do not have access or control over, what does that mean then, right? How do you account for that risk? Again, it's taking a look at what are you building out, what is the use case, and what can be the impact for figuring out what is the process you need and what is the process can be even the same, but what is the technology you need, what are the guardrails you need. That is going it is what we're seeing is very, very context based, right? There is really even less than usual, right? It's more context based. It's really no best practices. That's a misnomer because it is extremely based on the risk for the company itself.
Do you see this evolve in differently for different verticals or different functions? You gave the marketing HR example, but do you see that evolve differently? There are more companies investing in certain verticals, like finance is always ahead of the game in terms of jumping in because into new exponential tech because they have huge volume of data, but they also have, risk assessment and compliance and huge trust departments, right? I'm working with a bunch of automotive companies to figure out what, looking at their data, their silos from my past working with, value creation from data from autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles, thinking about that. And I'm thinking it is so different from when you think about a different company in education space or oil and gas or something else, which is not my sweet spot.
Right. So if you take a look at automotive, right, if you saw the latest interview and biography, Elon Musk had done a recent interview, and what he's talking about, I think this is a great example actually. What he's talking about is capturing data in a car, right? Taking those each and every video frame and using that for generating code of what a good driver, for example, behavior looks like. So for taking a subset of a population who have less maybe accidents, or let's say they're Uber driver, or and have um, less, what is it called, interference or taking over control, right? If they're driving in a car,
Disengagement. Yeah,
right,
disengagement.
right. The lesser the engagement, the better the driver, in their one of the metrics that they're following, for example. And he's taking a look at educating and actually writing, generating a code for using that video frame. So, I mean, the landscape is changing very, very fast, right? Now, if you look at, let's just dissect that. What is the kind of data, right? That is extremely personal data. If you are not going to cleanse that data, and you take a person driving a car and, you have all, if you're taking those frames, that is extremely sensitive data, right? What can be the problem here? As soon as regulations do get finalized, and let's say the EU Act, for example, they're talking about high risk data, high risk use cases, and low risk and critical cases, okay, risk areas. They say that you cannot use this data because it has highly sensitive data, right? Sensitive information. What happens now to the development? It's going to be a standstill. So therefore, the value of taking a risk-based approach to what are you doing and where can the risk come from, that is why it's so important to do that proactively and not wait for regulations. This is very high risk what he's doing, to take that all the data that is being captured in a car and to use that not only for analysis but for further development. That can come to a screeching halt if the regulations, if he doesn't take the right or the company doesn't take the right precautions in place to see what they're storing or how they're storing it. Do they need to tokenize that data? Do they need to obfuscate data that can be extremely harmful if it's compromised, for example? So that's how things play out, right? That's how world of cybersecurity and privacy impacts, for example, the risk, how much risk you have in something that you're building out, and to go back and remove all that is going to be not, you can't even do that. So we don't take these risks into account right from the beginning. That's where, we don't have to rely on regulations that are going to come down the pike. Let's take a look at regulations that already exist, right? We have enough guidance when it comes to regulations. It's a question of what process and what guidance a company is going to create in what they are doing, how they're going to do it. That is not something that we need assistance from regulators from, right? We know
So
what the right thing to do is.
this example, what you gave, I mean, Elon Musk has a habit of giving very sensational sounding examples that make people listen. Um, Automotive companies and insurance companies have been wanting to learn uh, driver behavior to make the car safe, to make driving safe with user permission. Like Progressive asks you to put a dongle, but makes you agree that your driver behavior will be monitored using sensors on when you brake and when you stop and how you drive and when you pick up acceleration and the like, based on which they're giving you better insurance premium. So they've been doing that, but the data that Elon Musk is talking about is for the self-driving car feature. He had basically said, we have some opaque point system and apply to get access to the self-driving car feature, but we will watch you, and then once your points are at 25 or whatever number, then we'll give you access. So everybody was, who's a Tesla fan, was falling over each other to give him access so that they can get access to the self-driving feature. And to take the computer vision frame to go do that is super expensive. It's annotated data. GDPR wise, he did not tell them that's how he was going to use the data. So he doesn't have permission. So that's out. But he's made a sensational example. So we are having a conversation about him, right? But I'm thinking about automotive companies who are responsible, compliant to the law, and practically get stuff done, and there is tons of data in the car already. I mean, a lot of it not collected with permission still. So that is a classic example of what you're saying, that think about the data you're collecting, think about the data you're going to use to
Right.
build the AI right at the beginning of the pipe. I remember when you and I started many years back about machine learning and cybersecurity, this was something that stuck with what you told me, that start at the beginning. When you collect data to train the model, think about compliance, think about risk, think about whether you will be asked to forget that data or that would cause risks.
Right.
It's
And what can you do as a business at the outset, right? That even if there was regulation that came down and said, hey, you cannot use this data. Well, if you can show that you are using it in a way that is not going to jeopardize the safety and security and also maybe the insurance premium in this case, for example, right? Um, Not in a negative way. That's where bias can creep in. That's really where it comes in, right? So it's a combination. I know it sounds cliche, right? It's people, process, technology, but now more so than ever, we really need a deep look at the use case, right? Top to bottom, to see what is it that we want. Yes, if we get X plus one things or N plus one things, that is going to be great. But first, we have to be very clear as to what is that intended outcome and where are the risks coming to that, right? So when you look at those essential pillars of trustworthy AI defined, right, which are 8, right? And that is to not slow companies down, but to actually help them identify, is it security or transparency or accountability, right? Or audit, right? All these play explainability, accountability, right? Who's making the decision? What is the model doing? Transparency. The 8 pillars, and each one of them may play a different role in that trustworthy AI. But you see, each one can really help you remove risk, not slow you down, but actually remove risk. So in this case, if it is insurance company, I don't know if you're familiar with the Colorado law that came out. They passed for insurance, for life insurance, that not only do you have to have an inventory of all the systems that are doing automated decision making, but for each model, you have to be able to show that data lineage, that, how is the model performing, is they have to take a risk management approach to creating any automated decision system, adopting AI systems in the company. Okay. Anything that has to do with external, I think it's called ECDIS, which is external customer data. So anytime that data is used, you have to be able to show what are the risks you're covering and how are you showing that you are taking these, have identified these risks and are mitigating and taking steps to not have this become a problem. So yes, I mean, I think that is maybe a good one to start with, because it does have the regulation is clearly pointing to, in this case, that it's not just going to be technology, right? We do tend to always think of, it will help us if we have a tool that can help kind of remove a lot of the headache, which is absolutely valid, because it does make life simpler. But I think the reality is we really do have to take, if we want this the fantastic output which we can get, where can things go wrong? That kind of reasoning, that hacker thinking of what can be compromised, what can be, is extremely important.
Thank you so much. I know I've asked questions and started a whole new discussion that is taking us past the hour. So I'll pass it on to Pariya. All the resources that you were sharing, if you can send that link back to Pariya, she'll post it on Weekly
Okay.
Wednesday site so that people can get access to that. Back to you, Pariya. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Sudha, for your questions as well. And since we're running short on time now, so we're going to wrap up, and I'll share my screen and show you how you can access some of the other weekly web resources. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Okay.
Okay, so we have, sorry, let me just, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to bit.ly/weeklyweds, you can go to our site, and I'm just showing you our site here. And over here, this shows this idea, bit.ly/weeklyweds. And then also, for those of you who are joining us later or on LinkedIn or YouTube, please, if you haven't already, please register at bit.ly/weeklywed registration. And to view our YouTube playlist, go to bit.ly/weeklywed playlist. And
the registration will get the Zoom link. It's only for people who want to join on Zoom, have to do the bit.ly weekly web registration. Otherwise, they just follow the live stream.
Yeah, and also if you do that, you also get access to our newsletter, our weekly newsletter.
Okay.
And yeah, and then recently we had a weekly web with Patrick Lynn, where we also talked about data and privacy, specifically the FTC investigation of OpenAI. So you can view that on our weekly web playlist.
Okay. Awesome.
And we also did touch prompt engineering today, so you can also sign up for our prompt engineering newsletter at bit.ly/prompt_engineering_webinar.
And as part of it, they will get access to the free course, right? That the one that Robert Schwenkter did, Prompt Engineering 101, a certificate course they can get from signing up here, right? They'll get access and they can finish the course online and get a certificate from Business School of AI.
Yeah, and you can see our first newsletter here, and you can, and every week you'll get resources on prompt engineering.
So bit.ly/prompt_engineering_webinar. Okay. Thank you, Pariya. Thank you for putting all this together. I know that I call you the queen of Bitly, but you help organize stuff because we have so much content with each week's weekly WED and free webinars and so much knowledge sharing around the globe on so many topics. So I appreciate all that you do. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Sudha. Thank you, Pamela. And thank you everybody for joining us today, those who joined live and those who are on LinkedIn and YouTube. We'll go ahead and wrap up now. So
Thank you.
Definitely, I would recommend following Pamela on her live stream that she does on LinkedIn. And she shares a whole bunch of resources and has a newsletter. So just follow Pamela Gupta on LinkedIn. And we are lucky that we got your time here today, Pamela. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That's Pariya.
Okay. Bye, everybody.